What I want to talk with you today about is how that everything we see happening in the world today is in a state of ambiguity. And by ambiguity, I mean all that's taking place on a global scale seems to be riddled with this uncertainty as to how it's all going to end up. And one need look no further than to the growing fears over the spread of even the origination of the coronavirus, which only creates more uncertainty. And I know I shared this last week, but to me, it's the fear that's spreading about this coronavirus that I think is doing more damage than the virus itself. And if you look at the numbers bear it out. It's the fear. But as Christians, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So I was at Hardware Hawaii again. I go there a lot because I'm always buying toilet parts. I don't know what that means, but so I had to get this part for one of our toilets. And so I was so thankful to the guy that was helping me, and I wanted to move him closer to Jesus, and said I was so blessed, and how are you doing? And then after he got done helping me get the right part, because they have like 800 different parts for one, specific toilet. Again, I don't want to share with you my problems. I have toilet problems, but anyway. So I went to shake his hand, and he come on, he's like, we're not supposed to do that. So he puts his fist out. I'm like, okay, so I gave him a fist pump. I wanted to give him a hug. It's interesting. I got an email. I didn't respond. It was kind of short notice anyway from a news publication on the East Coast. They wanted to interview me about what we were doing as a congregation. Apparently they had seen the YouTube video where I talked about, in our Bible prophecy update, the coronavirus. So she wanted to interview me for their news, broadcast about what we were doing as a congregation. I knew what she was after. She wanted to hear something like this. We're staying 3 feet away. We're telling congregants, your congregants, we're telling congregants that they should not, come to church. We'll just do a live stream. Don't hug anybody. Don't shake anybody. Don't go to church, because isn't that what the message is? Don't go to church. Oh, isn't that special? Don't go to church. Really? Man, apparently that's an issue for me. I need to maybe take this to the Lord. It's the fear. It's the fear factor. And the fear is spreading more than the virus is. And look what it's doing. It's doing more damage than the virus is. The fear is. That's just one. I got plenty more. It gets worse, so bear with me. Add to this the current election year here in the U.S., and with it, the third election in Israel last Monday. You've been following this? The third election in Israel, still inconclusive. While Netanyahu got more seats, he still fell short, and as of today is unable to form a government. And for the first time in Israel's history, they are now looking at, you ready for it? Wait for it. A fourth election. Unprecedented. The third election was unprecedented. The second election. A fourth election? If this isn't bad enough, the world's financial markets are on a roller coaster ride, and that's kind of an understatement. You've been watching the stock market this last week? Oh my, 1,000 points? I have a screenshot, and it shows 1,100 point drop on the Dow. And anyway, it's an indication of just how fearful investors are. And it's all based on uncertainty, future uncertainty. And then, to make matters even worse, the tensions in the Middle East, specifically concerning Syria, are escalating seemingly with each passing day. And sadly, it's eclipsed by the news now concerning the coronavirus. Just this morning before I came, as I was getting ready, I was listening to a news broadcast about what's happening in Italy. Did you hear about this? Milan, the main economic center in Italy, is completely shut down. The Pope is not delivering his Sunday Mass. I mean, the whole country has come to a standstill in Italy. And it's not much better in Iran, although they're not going to let us know, especially here in America, how bad it is there. It's all the fear, all the uncertainty. I want to pose a question. And it's one for which I myself have been pondering. And I want you to think it through with me. The question is this: could the world today be on the cusp of a change so drastic that it's the likes of which we've never seen before? Our lives as we know it will change in such a drastic way. It will be the likes of which we've never seen before. The truth of the matter is, some are suggesting that, intentional or not, the fears over this coronavirus will utterly and totally collapse the global economy. That's what experts are suggesting. So on Thursday, as I'm yelling at my TVs, this Fox News report caught my attention. Get this. The World Health Organization, WHO, is warning that handling cash spreads the coronavirus. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like for all of you to give me your cash. You know I'm just kidding, right? Okay. Well, isn't that convenient? Isn't that convenient? Cash now can spread the coronavirus. We need to get rid of cash. Perfect. The Bible calls it a cashless system, which is what we're told will happen during the 7-year tribulation. It's in Revelation chapter 13. Can I read verses 16 through 18? What are you going to say? No? I'm going to read them. He, speaking of the Antichrist, causes or forces all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, pretty much covers all, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. Some translations render it, and it's actually more accurate in the original language of the Greek New Testament, in. And verse 17, that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom, verse 18. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Now, I'm not going to get into all of this. There is much about this, especially as it relates to the technology that exists today digitally. The amount of information that can be stored on a very, very small size of a grain of rice chip. Back in the 80s, my very first computer, it was a IBM PC clone. and it didn't even have a hard drive. It had those two big floppy disks to operate the system, and some of you young people, we'll get back to you. This does not apply to you. Have no idea what we're talking about here. It was back in the day when we had 8 tracks and cassette tapes. They were plastic cartridges with... I digress. I think you get the point. The technology is such. I'll never forget when I first got my first hard drive, 20 megabytes. I'm like, I'll never fill this up. 20 megabytes? You know, you can get a micro SD card that's like a terabyte now. You know what a terabyte is? Again, I don't want to digress too much, but the technology today is such, and it is increasing, and this is a prophecy in the book of Daniel as well, that at the time of the end, technology would increase, knowledge would increase. I am of the belief that the Daniel prophecy about knowledge increasing in the last days is not just technology, but it's also the knowledge of Bible prophecy. It's my belief that it's never really been a matter of if this will happen. I mean, we've always known that it would one day happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and perhaps more importantly, how soon. And as you see the swiftness with which everything is happening, it's really an indicator of just how soon it will happen. I mention this, I think, almost on a weekly basis now. If we're seeing things that we're told will ultimately be fulfilled during the 7-year tribulation happening now, beginning to happen now, and the rapture has to be before the 7-year tribulation, and it does, then how close are we? If we're already seeing, I love the illustration of being in the shopping mall during the holidays. And you see all the signs up for Christmas, and they get earlier every year. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing them in July this year, but you know, all the Christmas decorations are up. And it should get us very excited for Thanksgiving. Why? Because Thanksgiving comes before Christmas. And when you see all of the decorations, all the signs are up for Christmas, and Thanksgiving comes before Christmas, that means Thanksgiving's very close, because Thanksgiving's before Christmas. And so too is the rapture before all that we're seeing happen today. We're close. It's soon. It's very soon. Let me get a little more specific here with what I believe is soon to happen. It's that of a new world order. And to me, it's a textbook case of out with the old and in with the new. I mean, how are you going to bring in a new one world economy? Well, you first have to crash the global economy. You have to get out with the old before you can bring in the new. How are you going to bring in a one world government? Oh, you have to get out with the old and in with the new. I tell you, and I'm not dogmatic about it, but this situation in Israel is really interesting and intriguing to me. Israel right now does not have a functioning government. They have a prime minister. They do not have a functioning government. I wonder. And then here we are this year in an election year. Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, that's when I yell at my TV the most, is when I look at the political landscape and I think to myself, oh, Jesus, come quickly, please. So it has to be out with the old in order for it to be in with the new. And what's coming seems to have this unstoppable momentum towards that which we're told in the Bible will happen at the time of the end. When I say unstoppable momentum, I mean that I do not see a scenario where it's all of a sudden going to just kind of dissipate. The momentum that has already been created, geopolitically especially, I do not see a situation where it just begins to slow down. In fact, I believe the opposite is true. It's actually speeding up, revving up. What Jesus is saying is, I come at a time when things are revved up, when there's going to be this momentum and things are moving very fast, very fast. Consider just 8 such prophecies in the Bible that are quickly beginning to come to pass, that have this unstoppable momentum. Number 1, Daniel 2, verses 40 through 44 tells us that in addition to the aforementioned global economy, there will also be a global government. So, one world government, one world economy, and one world religion. Number 2, Revelation 6, verse 8 describes deadly diseases and viruses that will wipe out a large population of the earth. Number 3, in Matthew 24, Jesus himself said there will be an increase in deception, wars, threats of wars, rumors of wars, uprisings, nation rising up against nation, kingdom against kingdom, ethnic group against ethnic group in the original, famines, pestilences, and earthquakes. And he likens them, talk about revving up and speeding up, he likens them to birth pains which increase in frequency and intensity. Certainly just earthquakes alone, if you were to go back and look at the increase of large earthquakes just in the last 20 years, it's off the charts, exactly as Jesus said it would be. Number 4, Zechariah 12, verses 1 through 3, is a detailed prophecy about how dividing Jerusalem will become the intoxicating obsession of all the nations of the world. And certainly today we are witnessing in real time, at breakneck speed, this insatiable quest to solve the Jerusalem problem, the peace between the so-called Palestinians and Jews living side by side in peace and security. Number 5, Daniel 9:27 is a very specific prophecy about the Antichrist confirming, making greater. In the original language of the Hebrew, it's the same as my Arab language. The same word, higbir, means greater, superior, spectacular. So the Antichrist, we're told in Daniel 9:27, is going to make greater, superior, a 7-year peace agreement. And there's every indication that part of that peace deal will include the rebuilding of the Jewish temple, the third temple. Because at the midpoint, and we're going to see that, Lord willing, in a couple of weeks when we are in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where the Antichrist will set himself up in the newly rebuilt temple, as Daniel prophesies here in chapter 9, verse 27, and he will demand to be worshipped as God at the midpoint, the 3.5-year mark of the 7-year tribulation, which would indicate that the temple will be part of the deal and rebuilt at the very beginning of the 7-year tribulation. Because the temple has to be there in order for the Antichrist to demand to be worshipped. And he'll commit the abomination that causes desolation. Many believe it'll be the sacrificing of an unclean animal. And here's the thing. This is when the Jews will realize this is not our Messiah. And they will flee, many believe, to Petra in modern-day Jordan, where for the last 3.5 years, God will protect Israel, and the whole house of Israel will be saved. And by the way, that's the purpose of the 7-year tribulation, is for the salvation of the Jewish nation. Number 6, Isaiah 17:1, another very specific prophecy about how Damascus, Syria, will become a ruinous heap of rubble, and as such, it will be a city that will be uninhabitable. Number 7, and it sort of ties into the Isaiah 17:1 prophecy. It's Ezekiel 38. And it's about Russia, Iran, and Turkey leading this alliance of nations to invade Israel from the north, there in the Golan on the border with Syria. Many believe, present company included, subsequent to the destruction of Damascus, Syria. Iran, Russia, Turkey, et al., all of these nations that are listed by their ancient names in Ezekiel 38 will advance from the north, from Syria, into Israel to take a spoil. And number 8, lastly, and certainly not least, and this is why I am placing it as number 8. It's in 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. We're told that in the end, in the last days, what will mark the last days, the last moments of world history as we know it, will be that Christians who believe in and watch for, and I'll add, talk about the Lord's return, will be increasingly mocked and ridiculed. Where's this coming that he promised? Everybody thought that the Lord was going to come in their lifetime. My parents, my grandparents, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents thought it was in their lifetime. Well, that was by God's design. Even the Apostle Paul. We who are alive and remain, he thought it was going to be in his lifetime. By God's design. The rapture of the Church of Jesus Christ needs nothing to happen by way of a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. The Lord's return can be at any time. At any time. The imminent return of Jesus Christ for His church. Now, the second coming, many prophecies have to come to pass prior to the second coming, but not the rapture. So here's Christians talking about the rapture. Pastors teaching Bible prophecy. Christians sharing on social media about the Lord's return. Oh my, I get so many emails, but emails and comments posted. So, I shared one of your prophecy updates on Facebook, and I lost like 355 friends. So thank you very much. I'm never doing that again. Nobody wants to hear it. You're a nutcase. You're a whack job. You're a fruitcake. I mean, I can keep going if you want, but you can fill in the blanks. The Lord's return. I want to close with a question. And again, I would just kindly ask you to think about this, think through this. Here's the question. Does it seem to you that the unstoppable momentum with everything that's happening has now passed the proverbial point of no return? In other words, can you imagine a scenario where you'll wake up one morning and go through your news feed and read that Russia has left Syria, returned to Russia, Iran has left Syria, returned to Iran, Turkey has left Idlib in Syria and returned to Turkey? Do you see a scenario in which the pause button could be pushed on all that is happening today? Or do you see it the other way? That instead of the pause button, it's the fast forward is being pushed on everything collectively. That's the one thing. If you were to ask me what has been the most exciting thing for me as a teacher of Bible prophecy since we started doing these prophecy updates 14 years ago now, my answer would be that it's the convergence of all the prophecies simultaneously, one in concert with the other. See, when I first started doing this, I would get up and talk about Ezekiel 38 future tense. Now I'm talking about it present tense. At the ready today, Iran, Russia, Turkey are in Syria exactly as we were told they would be. 14 years ago, we were talking about Ezekiel 38 and the prosperity, the oil, the natural gas. It wasn't until just a few years ago that they found this, natural gas and oil, which is the hook, I believe, that Ezekiel 38 describes in the jaw of Gog, bringing them against his people Israel. And very interesting is verse 13 of Ezekiel 38, which we talk about often. It wasn't until just 2 years ago, that we could talk about the relationship that now Saudi Arabia has with Israel. And this is verse 13 of Ezekiel 38, where we're told that Sheba and Dedan, which is the modern day nation of Saudi Arabia, would protest this invasion. Have you come to take booty? Have you come to take a spoil? The implication is that at the time of the Ezekiel 38 attack, Saudi Arabia and Israel are going to be chummy. When we were in Israel a couple of years ago, we had the former, who's become a good friend of mine, not a believer, Ron Prosor, the former United Nations ambassador for Israel, come to speak to our group. And we opened it up for questions and answers, and he made this comment about the Arab nations that are now friendly with Israel, how they had to keep it, under the radar. And whenever the leaders from Saudi Arabia would come, they would come in through the back door. He says, now it's all out in the open. We're not hiding it anymore. We have a great relationship with Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf. It's Ezekiel 38. 3 years ago, I couldn't have talked about that like I can today. Everything is coming together exactly as we were told it would. How about Damascus, Syria? Just in the last 2-3 years, this situation in Syria. And again, you take everything. And now, what we see happening in this election year, in this country, the number one question, I did say I was going to close, right? I will, just a moment. This will be the last thing, okay? Just in the last, I would say 6 months to a year, one of the things that is really striking to me is how everything is perfectly fitting into place prophetically. You talk about these puzzle pieces, these Bible prophecy puzzle pieces, everything is fitting together perfectly and exactly as we were told they would. What are you saying, Pastor? I'm saying that the Lord's return is so close. So much so that it's closer than any of us could ever imagine.